Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome to Starship Troopers Terran Command, a real-time tactical strategy game set, of course, in the Starship Troopers universe, where you take command of the mobile infantry of the Terran Federation as it faces off against the Bogue menace. Those of you who are fans of the original movie will pretty much immediately know what's going on here, as it is the primary visual inspiration from the game, though it does also draw quite a lot from both the other live-action movies, God help us, like, for example, the Marauder suit, the giant walking mech, and also draw some inspiration from other video games, like the Starship Troopers first-person shooter, where you get the Royal Warrior. It even draws a little inspiration from the Japanese animated version too. What this game unfortunately does not draw a whole lot of inspiration from, however, is the book. Nor does it draw a whole lot of setting inspiration either from the original movie, as the Terran Federation of this game is the cartoonishly evil variant of the Terran Federation that is willing to throw away the lives of mobile infantrymen for no particular reason whatsoever, and will execute civilians for unionizing against the Federation. I'm not going to launch into a long-winded explanation as to why this has nothing to do with the Terran Federation in neither the original movie or the book, since this is of course a review of the video game, but if you are interested in the long-winded explanation variant, I did do a lore video on the Terran Federation back on my primary lore channel, so check that out if you're interested. For now, suffice to say, the Terran Federation is not an evil government, it is not fascistic, it is in fact extremely libertarian in nature. It is a state that places the rights and the privileges of its citizens and its civilians in extraordinarily high regard. But again, we're not going to get too much into it here, so let's get down to brass tack, shall we? At the start of each mission, you are given a handful of little units. You've got a decent variety of units inspired by the various movies and entries into the now rather confused Starship Troopers mythos, including troops armed with the Morita Mark II rifle, electro troops, you get Marauder suits, of course, you get fleet officers that can call down airstrikes, you get tactical officers with the ability to buff units, and you get marksman snipers. One of the core gimmicks of the game is that quite a few of these units cannot shoot through one another. So if you put one unit of riflemen behind another unit of riflemen, the second unit can't fire because it can't see the enemy and because it's afraid of hitting the friendly units in front of them. This means that you have to maneuver a bit more carefully on the map. You can't simply form into an enormous ball like you could, for example, in Terran Ascendancy, and then simply roll through the map, gunning down anything and everything in your way. The game also has an elevation mechanic that does allow you to shoot over intervening units so long as the firing unit is on a higher level than the intervening unit. So if you've got riflemen on the low ground and one on the high ground, both units can shoot at the enemy as they are assumed to be able to fire over the heads of their comrades. It's an interesting idea, but the mechanic is a little bit half-formed, and even the game itself begins rejecting it around mission 4 or 5, where you get an ever-increasing number of units that either shoot through your guys, like the snipers, or have abilities that let them shoot through your guys, like the E-troopers, or simply shoot over them with grenade launchers, like the tactical officer, or the rocket launcher trooper, or the the fleet command officer with her bombing runs, etc. Because the game kind of realizes that, alright, I mean, this is cool and all, the firing line, but most of our maps are incredibly narrow to begin with, to the point that in many cases it's difficult to place 2 units next to each other, much less 3 or 4, and this is of course done to give the arachnids a hope in everlasting hell to actually get into close quarters combat once they're facing off against 30-40 dudes with assault rifles. So, the mechanic kind of It's self-defeating in a way, is probably how I would put it. On the one hand, you're encouraged to, tactically place your men so that they can all fire past one another, but if you actually manage to place all of your units well, then the arachnids get gunned down. So the map design and the mission design needs to be made in such a way as to not allow you to simply just place a battle line of dudes and gun down an infinite number of warriors. It's a difficult balancing job that I don't really think benefits the game over much, because honestly, after the first 3 odd missions, I was also almost completely ignoring the mechanic. I would line them up a little bit here and there, but most of the time, I would make sure that I had 2 or 3 frontline units, and then I just kept spamming on snipers or rocket launchers, or made active use of their unit special abilities, like grenades or shotguns, etc., because again, in most of the maps, you just didn't have the liberty to actually form any kind of decent firing line. I feel like the time dedicated to this mechanic and the justification of its gameplay might have been better spent on something else, as I don't feel it adds all too much to the game. As here's one of Terran Command's biggest limitations. It is just a single-player campaign. You can skirmish the various missions, you can select a mission and then play that mission again, but beyond that, there's no versus AI skirmish, there's no multiplayer, and there's no arachnid campaign, giving the game very limited replayability. You can increase the difficulty, which decreases the damage your weapons do, which is not my taste of difficulty, but it might be interesting for some to do it on the higher difficulties, sure. But really, once you've cleared the game once, which should take you between 8 to 12 hours, there's not a whole lot of reason to revisit it. Now, 12 hours of entertainment for $30 is not a bad deal, but it's not a great deal either. I feel like what the game could really have used is some more personality. Take, for example, the old strategy game Terran Ascendancy. In that game, each individual MI trooper was an individual. You could rename them. You got their faces and bios given to you, and you could equip them with various weapons. You could give them a rocket launcher, which takes away their morita. You could put them in various forms of battle armor. Some battle armor with chain guns, some with grenade launchers, all kinds of cool stuff. It gave you a very good reason to care about your troops. In Terran Command, there really is not much of a reason to give 2 shits about your little mobile infantrymen. They do gain veterancy in that mission, as in, it doesn't carry on over to the next mission again, but unlocking veterancy does give access to some stat increases and eventually a special ability. Most of the units have at least one ability to begin with, which is nice because it gives you something active to do whilst you're fighting. The riflemen, for example, have access to a high explosive grenade, the rocket soldiers have explosive rockets, and the snipers have access to special upgrades that gives you a area of effect radar beacon, which allows you to see up hills, or access to crippling shot. The riflemen have access to a shotgun blast or a larger grenade bundle, with the units having access to 2 special abilities when they reach the max veterancy level. This does give you some reason, you don't want to throw away your units completely willy-nilly, but it doesn't cost anything to call them in, so even if your army gets wiped out, well, just call the whole army back down again, and you'll have lost some veterancy, sure, you'll have lost some of the special abilities, but it's not really a tremendous loss, and it certainly doesn't make you want to reload the game because you lost one of your favorite units. It's also a bit sad because you can rename your units, you can name your division, and yet you don't really have any interaction with them at all. A more personalized approach, I think, would have benefited the game tremendously, and maybe even given it a little bit more of a role-playing aspect, maybe allowing you to customize the layout and loadout of your troops rather than calling down different types of troops. Maybe you could have had a whole division in orbit made up of X amount of squads, and it's up to you to equip them with whatever weapons and then call them down. So you want to be careful about risking your elite troops, etc., etc. Some sort of replayability would also be very, very nice. Perhaps multiplayer isn't the answer, because I imagine it would be an absolute hellish task to try and balance the arachnids versus the mobile infantry. I don't think I would have wanted that job, to be entirely honest, as I think no matter how you do it, one side is going to come off feeling very frustrated. Like, either the arachnids are going to get just gunned down and they're going to hate every second of it, or the mobile infantry are going to be forced into lots of narrow corners where they'll be overrun by the arachnids instantly and feel very frustrated about it. But some sort of a co-op mode I think would have been very useful, and a horde mode. By God, this game needs a horde mode, because the game shines. It really shines when you're doing large-scale defense missions, or you're fighting your way through enormous hives of constantly respawning warriors and elite armies, just flooding out at you. And they have increased the rate of arachnids quite considerably since the demo, at least I feel like it, because it feels like you're fighting a lot more of them, which is good. I think there should be even more on screen, mind you. I would like to see the numbers doubled, honestly, but it's better than the demo, definitely. And it does make you feel like you're fighting against a wave-style enemy as you're taking one step forward, gunning down another horde, one step forward, ever closer to their bug holes and their little hidey spawny places. That part of the gameplay is really cool. And so a proper dedicated horde mode, where you just have to survive against an infinite number of ever more tough enemies along with a friend, would be amazing and give a absolutely enormous amount of replay value to the game. You could potentially also, I don't know what Slytherin and the Aristocrats' plans are with the game. That's the developer and publisher, by the way. Maybe they're planning stuff like this in the future, different game modes. Maybe they're planning new chapters for the story, etc. Entirely possible, and I do hope they do, because this is a solid foundation, but it feels like it lacks an awful lot of meat. And that's also where a lot of the gameplay problems come in, because the campaign is... some of it is great. The mission where you defend the enormous fort, whose name I forget, for example, that one is really, really cool, though it desperately makes you wish for, if not a pause mode, then a slow the game down button, as you need to scroll 3 screens over to check the other side of the fortification. And sadly, your units do not have intelligent targeting. So your snipers, for example, will not automatically target spitters, the enemy long-range units, even though that is what they're specifically meant to counter. Just like your rocket troopers will not automatically target the enemy's heavy bugs, which again, they're specifically designed to counter. Meaning that you have to... all too often, you kind of feel like you're playing a 1990s RTS, where you have to manually give out targets constantly, and it's not the fun kind of micro. The fun kind of micro is selecting a rocketman and then dropping a high-explosive grenade or a fragmentation warhead on the enemy. The fun kind of micro is throwing hand grenades and activating shotguns, not being like, ah, god damn it, spitters, snipers come over here, target that unit, etc., etc. There are definitely some improvements that can be made there. I think definitely some automatic targeting options would be nice. For example, you could set a unit to, okay, you target armor first, you target light first, and so on. And it would probably allow you to throw a much larger hordes at the player, because they would be able to offload some of the duties of micromanagement onto the AI. Alternatively, in a nice little slow-mo mode, for example, would help a tremendous deal. But to return to the campaign is told via some voice-acted segments in-game. The voice acting varies in quality. It's not awful, but it's not amazing either. There's a bit of phoning it in there, a bit of lack of direction, I do believe. There are some segments that could be delivered with a great deal more vim and vigor, shall we say. There are also some very neat animated cutscenes. They're quite short, but, you know, they come across as nice and propaganda-y, which is good. That's the Starship Trooper feel, absolutely. The mission designs, again, this is one of the big problems. Defending the big fort, awesome. Fighting into a huge city, gunning down hordes of enemies, fighting across open plains, that shit is really, really cool, because you're fighting a huge amount of arachnids. You're doing the fun thing. You're killing the boogs. That's what you're there for. But sometimes, and far too often, in fact, the majority of the missions are take a small number of units and walk through the map slowly killing some things. It even has a god-awful stealth mission, which is just... If your game is not specifically built around stealth mechanics, do not put stealth in your missions. It is not fun, it is not interesting, and it does not provide me with any kind of a change of pace, beyond making me go from, hey, I'm enjoying this, to, I'm really fucking hating this shit. That's about it. And there are far too many escort missions where you are given a unit and you have to keep that unit alive. Luckily, the unit is usually under your control, which helps a lot, but it's not great design. Again, you've got the strength of the game, which is fighting enormous waves of enemies, and they deviate from that strength, I'd say about 70% of the missions, which, not amazing, not amazing. All in all, the campaign is serviceable, but it really feels like the hors d'oeuvre, like the appetizer for something bigger and meatier on the horizon. The lack of persistent units, again, I feel is a tremendous misstep that reduces the value of the campaign a lot, in my opinion. Now, what about other things like visuals and audio design? Well, the visuals are alright, they serve their purpose. You can't really turn the camera, which is a bit annoying. You have a heavy limitation on how much you can zoom in, so you can't really get, the cool shots. That's a bit annoying as well. The units themselves look pretty cool. The gunfire effects are very nice. They kick up little sprays around the enemy as you miss. You fire shotguns and there's clouds of shrapnel going on about. It looks nice and devastating, definitely. The arachnids move about, they look like they're roaring, they're waving their little stabby arms, etc. It's quite neat. The audio design as well is... some of it's good, some of it's not very good at all. The arachnids sound good, they screech and they scream and they roar, which is excellent. Your little guys fire their rifles. The basic Morita sounds okay, the Marauders sound awful. They suffer badly from plinky-plonk gun syndrome, and the suits themselves are completely silent. No mechanical walking sound, no thud, thud as it travels across the ground, anything like that. Quite disappointing. And the suits themselves are not particularly powerful either. They're cool and all, but they feel like they should be a lot more for the price and the availability than they actually are. The unit animation quality too is not very good. The sniper, for example, he fires his weapon whilst he's in the process of trying to kneel down, and once he's done kneeling down, he immediately stands back up again. So it looks like he's trying to kind of shake and throw the bullets out of his rifle, which is not great. Your mobile infantryman will raise his rifle for a split second and then lower it again, firing from the hip and just kind of skipping between the two animations instead of firing off a satisfying burst or advancing on the enemy, firing, etc. Animation department definitely needs some work. The mech suits as well, again, they don't really look like mech suits. They just were very stiff and upright walking. The arachnids are done pretty well, but there's not a whole lot of variety in their movement, with the various larger bugs also often kind of moving in the same way. Even some of the new bugs, like the giant plasma scorpion thing, you'd kind of expect it to maybe be a little bit wild, writhe around a bit, have its tail going back and forth. It's basically a tank. Could use some more work, but it's certainly not a deal breaker by any extent of the imagination. And I really do like the E-Troopers, particularly when you use their overcharge ability and they start firing little lasers at people. That's really cool. The explosions too are pretty damn nice as well. So it's serviceable. It's middle of the field, which is starting to become Slytherin's middle name. As Slytherin, yet again, delivers a game that... it's right across, it's straight down the middle. There's no real surprises here. There's no real wows, but there's no real it's either. Which, it's something, certainly. But I feel like there was an awful lot of room for something more here. Something bigger, something greater than what we got. I feel like Starship Troopers, Terran Command, and something else as well. I remember them talking about that you would have the ability to make decisions during the campaign, like abandoning civilians or not abandoning civilians, and this would affect your war support, which doesn't seem to be in the game at all. Like, the campaign is entirely static as far as I can tell. You can choose to not do some side missions, which does affect your war support in that it'll give you slightly less of a resource you can use in the mission, but it sounds like this would have far greater ramifications, really. Meh. It's not the greatest campaign in that way, and it certainly wasn't what I had imagined. A grand scope campaign where you moved from planet to planet fighting a vast offensive against the bugs, maybe? Anywho, to wrap things up a little bit, all in all, what do we got here? We've got, again, it's Slytherin. It is straight down the middle. It really could be so much more, but it also isn't so much less either. The game could and should have had a horde mode. The game could and should have had persistent unit. It could and should have had some customization. It shouldn't have some kind of multiplayer, some kind of cooperative to increase the longevity of the game. It could have had a dynamic campaign where there might be some interest in replaying it. Maybe you don't want that guy to face a court-martial for saving your dudes. Maybe you want him to. Maybe you're all on the side of the intelligence officer, or maybe you're all on the side of the corporal, etc. Maybe you could have some inter-service rivalry going on there, stuff like that. Meanwhile, however, the core gameplay loop is entirely satisfactory. You walk around, you shoot bugs, and sometimes it feels really, really damn good. It feels Starship Troopers-y. You're fighting through enormous hordes, you're gunning them down, they're screaming, there's green blood splurting over everywhere, and then the arachnids overwhelm your line, blood screaming more, re-rar, all kinds of cool stuff. The problem is these moments are outnumbered considerably by the walking across the map, using the attack button a little bit too much, needing to manually target certain enemy units, the goddamn escort missions, the goddamn stealth mission, etc. The epic moments are too few and far between to really leave me with a satisfying campaign experience. I'm done with the campaign now. It took me about 12 hours, and unless something very unique happens, I don't see myself ever replaying that campaign. And I replayed the Starship Troopers, the first-person shooter, like 5 times. That's how desperate I've been for a good Starship Troopers game, so, For the average consumer, $30 for 12 hours of entertainment, maybe 20 if you want to replay it on a higher difficulty. It's not the worst value for your money. It's basically $1 an hour at that point. Not bad in the slightest, but it's not gonna shake you to your core. It's not gonna leave you breathless and wowed. Wowed. There you go. Really, it's not gonna do anything unique. It's not gonna do anything beyond the expected, and it will probably be a rather fleeting acquaintance. If, however, you really, really want a Starship Troopers game, and let's be fair, there's not a lot of those around, then this is a Starship Troopers game. It does what you would expect from a Starship Troopers game. It's got the mobile infantry firing their Moritas into hordes of charging, screaming, I'm about to say Tyranids there, arachnids. I probably have called them Tyranids a couple times through the video, honestly, but good enough for government work, I do suppose. You've got rocket launchers. You don't really have nuclear rocket launchers, sadly. You've got the Morita Mark II. You've got lots of nice little nods to the extended mythos, even though probably most Starship Troopers fan would like for most of those movies to not exist, but still. It's nice to see. You're like, oh hey, I recognize that thing from that god-awful movie I wish didn't exist. So I take it back. There is a revolutionary thing in this game, and that is the very weird form of fan service. Oh, I wish you wouldn't remind me of that movie video game, but hey, I do like the weapon you're showing me, so it's okay, I guess. So yeah, for the average consumer, I'd probably say wait, see what their plans are, see how they're going to expand upon this, see if they're going to add some kind of horde mode, see if they're going to do something interesting, or hell, just wait for a $2 off sale. $10 for 12 hours? Again, $1 per hour or something. It's absolutely worth that. If you're a massive Starship Trooper fan, however, well, again, let's be honest, you don't have a lot of choice, do you? It's this game or back to the early 2000s or late 1900s. And again, it's not going to disappoint. It's just not going to blow your socks off either. Till next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.